Agent Albatross here again with the Cypher Unlimited crew. We have our usual suspects of AD or Alpha Dean. We have Spigs18 or Anthony. And just real quick, if you haven't liked or subscribed, be sure to do so. It helps our channel grow and helps us bring you more marvelous content. And Dean, what are we doing here today?
Well, you know, like we do just about every Wednesday night, we're going to have a discussion. We have none other than our good friend Claire from Infinite Construct.
Hello.
And she's pretty awesome out there. She's killing it with the Numenera vibe and all the good stuff that she brings to the table about that. And we're just going to talk about it tonight, what we do to prep, you know, and, you know, we got another perspective on it besides the three of us. So, Ed, without further ado.
Yeah, so first of all, welcome, Claire. You know, you're part of the family, so it's always awesome to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
To BS with us about gaming. You know, this whole concept of game prep for players and GMs came. Me and Claire were having a discussion the other day about, like, we were trying to figure out a show topic that we could have her on to chat with us about. And Claire came up with the idea of maybe we'll talk about prep, because we were talking about my minimal prep from my Tolas game that Claire happens to be a player in. So I thought it was a great idea. You know, I think we should just basically, you know, try to explain our thought process in terms of game prep for both the GM and player perspectives. And, you know, maybe something we do could help you out with your prep, or maybe you could tell us something that'll help us out with our prep, because, you know, you're always learning and growing and building as a GM, and you should always have that mindset. So let's just get started with the GM side of the screen. Yes, Dean, I said screen.
The screen.
Ooh, dirty words.
So I guess my first question, you know, I want to ask you guys is, what's the first thing you do or think of when you know you have to prep for a Cypher System game?
Well, maybe we should like specify like you know, a pre-written adventure or an original adventure, because those are like two totally different things.
Oh,
sometimes.
Actually, so let's answer, what's the difference in prep between a pre-written adventure or something you created yourself?
Well, Claire, you're our guest. You know, you go first.
Well, I mean, if it's pre-written, the first step, and this is a very important one, is to read the adventure. Like that like honestly, that is one of the most important things you can do. And sometimes it's all you need to do. Sometimes is to just read through that adventure and kind of get a map in your head of what the scenes are. And sometimes that is literally all you need to prepare. When you're writing your own one, that's when things get a little bit different. And that's, you know, if we're talking Cypher System, I know for me with preparing for an original adventure is I just write a story. Kind of the beautiful thing about the Cypher System is you can just sort of like, you can just write a story and then you come in with the rules from the Cypher System, like a tape measure or something. And you just figure out, you know, what this difficulty should be, how hard should this be? And that some sort of comes after you've kind of established somewhat of a narrative flow. And a good way that I get into that is I kind of ask myself is like, what is happening right now in the world where the adventure takes place? And what has happened maybe a couple of weeks ago? What has led up to what happened right now, or the state that the players are in? And what is likely to happen if the players are not there? And those kind of goalposts of like what's happening right now, what has happened in the past, and what will happen if there were no players, sometimes is enough of a prompt for you to kind of sit down and start writing a story. And then, you know, you can start injecting the numbers and stuff into that. But that's sort of what I do. What do you guys do?
I'm a little bit different in that respect. Well, of course, like we said, with the pre-written stuff, of course, read it. You know, I think everybody's going to do that when I do. Well, Anthony doesn't, but that's a different story. But
hey, I skim it.
But when I'm actually creating something of my own, I don't write a full story, because players will always do the unexpected.
Oh yeah.
I build frameworks. I have conceptual ideas. And so kind of like the idea of building an encounter, a scene, I build landmarks, you know, specific places that something can happen in, you know, a scene can take place in. And I leave everything kind of flexible, because players are going to go off the rails. So I leave it flexible in the sense that I can adjust on the fly. If I need my players to encounter a certain thing or a certain something, I can inject it into that place. So I basically create the frameworks, which are destinations, the NPCs, and possible environmental hazards and so on and so forth, or ambient things that have to go on.
Dean, what's the first thing you do though?
Literally, that's how my brain works. I see those things first, and then I'll just start plugging them in. And as far as like what Claire was saying about the numbers, most of that's esoteric too. That's flexible because it depends on what my players are doing. You know, you got some players who are inventive, and so I kind of keep it flexible, loose and flexible.
Because when you said framework, right?
Yeah.
Like I know exactly what you mean, but I've been gaming with you for several years now. Could you like elaborate a little bit more so for the person that doesn't necessarily understand what you mean by framework? Like what's that look like?
Okay, real easy. Let's just say we were going to get ready to play a superhero scenario. And everybody said they wanted to play gritty superheroes, Batman style, Punisher style, so on and so forth. The first thing in that framework that I would have to come up with is the city itself. What type of city setting they're going to be into. That's number one. The second thing would be what kind of threats are they dealing with? Are they dealing with muggers and mobsters? Are they dealing with a corporation that's, pumping, experimental drugs into the neighborhood and it's causing problems? So my frameworks are always basically what the thrust of the scenario is going to be and what it looks like, what the environment is, because those two things are going to drive everything else.
So just for clarity, do you physically write that down or do you like keep it in a mental database?
No, a lot of times I write stuff down because I get to use it later, so I have notebooks full of concepts. I have city concepts where if somebody ever said, hey, Dean, write me a campaign setting for a city, a gritty city, I could literally go pick up a book and have the framework where I could write everything out. Those things actually come in handy. I probably learned that about 25 years ago, about 25 years ago, I learned that it was a good idea to kind of keep some organized notes, Yeah,
and I think it's important too when you're writing that stuff down is to not feel any kind of stress or burden that what you are writing down necessarily has to reach a certain level of creativity. Like literally, sometimes I will sit down and I'll kind of do a similar thing and I'll just jot down like 6 or 7 ideas. And then I won't think about them for a while. And then maybe I'll go back and I'll look at the ideas that I've written and I'll see like, oh, that works. Like if it's a city idea or it's a setting idea, or sometimes I'll write down like lines of dialogue. Like I'll envision an NPC saying something really interesting. And I'm like, oh, I want that NPC to say that to players. And so I'll write that down and I'll revisit that. And I'll think like, well, where does that take place? And more often than not, it's just the act of like getting that stuff written down and building a habit of writing it down. And it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be overly creative. It just needs to be there because it's going to become creative. It's going to become productive when it's in a game.
And it's very important to recognize, especially for a newer GM, that it doesn't need to be used just because you wrote it down.
Exactly.
Important. I think
yes.
The early me would try to force feed concepts because it was cool on paper, but you got to be able to read the session and read the table to know whether it's going to work or not with that particular table. Al, before I go, you want me to go first or you want to go?
No, I can go because I basically follow the same idea or style as Dean, where I make quote unquote framework, but it's probably even more loose where I don't even think of like a city or like details or anything like that. All that stuff comes up on the fly. It's like I might have when you're making a game or whatever, or crafting a game, you always have a setting in mind. So I'll keep the setting details in the back of my mind, but I don't really write anything down. The things I tend to write down would be what would be like, I guess, major plot points, quote unquote, like where I want the PCs to kind of end up eventually, not how they connect to each other by any means, because most of the times the players will do their own thing instead of doing what happens to be written down. So having these major points with nothing like detailed connecting them makes it easier, so when the players go off the rails, you just kind of figure out how to get them back onto it with the major plot point that you have in mind without those tiny details. Having those tiny details can kind of trip you up when the players don't do the thing, which I learned in literally the first game I ran for you, Anthony, and whoever else was in that game. But yeah, and generally speaking, I tend to start with the last scene first. Like, usually when I'm getting inspired by something, it's usually like, hey, that would be a cool big bad evil guy, or hey, this would be a cool culmination of things. And then I kind of work backwards, like how did they get to this point? Like, where did they end up? Or excuse me, and then once the end is like kind of fleshed out a little bit, then I go to the beginning. See, hey, where did this journey start? And the middle is where it kind of is most vague, because that's where the players interject the most.
That makes the most sense. I think I'm a little bit a mix of everyone here, except that I'm writing in napkins, and I come up with the key thing for me. The first thing I always do personally is I come up with a high concept, because I feel comfortable if I have a high concept already. And what I mean by high concept is, what is the overall narrative I'm trying to tell? Like, what am I trying to evoke? Am I trying to tell a story of morality, like what we're doing in this Tollus game? Or am I trying to have a beer and pretzel smash up? So I come up with a high concept, and I don't prep a story, I prep scenes. So I may write up, if someone from the outside looking in would look like it's a crazy man's writing, because I'm literally like, I'll do what Claire does. I'll put dialogue. And in my mind, that dialogue is actually a scene, and then I might get in depth with the ending scene, but everything is sporadic. The one thing that I fully flesh out I fully flesh out the opening scene. I think that's very important, especially for me. Like, the reason why it's important for me is it gets my creative juices flowing when I know I have, like, the first 20 minutes of the game is scripted for me. Everything after that, I can improv. As long as I start off with like a mini script, it helps me, like, it gets the juices flowing, if that makes any sense.
That's awesome. I mean, Anthony, that's actually a good segue into like the next question. I'll let you answer it first, since you said that. So for that opening scene prep, since that's like really scripted out for you, what is it that you feel you need to know from your characters, from the players, from that perspective to begin your adventure and to begin that prep?
Yeah, I think that this is a mistake that I made early on in Cypher System, because I thought since Cypher System characters are less crunchy, than, like, say I came from D&D and more crunchy systems, I thought I didn't have to really concentrate on the character, which was a huge mistake, because you really should go through each character with a fine-tooth comb, because you got to look at those abilities and try to imagine what are the creative uses your players are going to do with those.
Exactly, yeah.
Even though you're going to be 100% wrong, because they're going to come up with something even more creative than what you did, at least you have an idea of where they could go with these characters, if that makes any sense. And also, remember what ciphers you gave. If you start in the game giving them ciphers, you should know what each player character's ciphers are in their possession.
Yeah, and I would add to that skills, like knowing what your players are trained in, specialized, and have inabilities in is substantially important. Because to start, anything that is a level 1 difficulty, if someone has a matching skill for that, that's an automatic success. And if they're specialized in that skill, they will take level 2 difficulties and will automatically succeed. And, as the GM, it's a really good idea to keep track of that, because whether or not you ask for rolls with a task that goes down to level 0 is kind of, up to you. But like, as soon as you need to have that kind of sense of like, okay, what by the players just existing changes the game. And like this kind of, there was a question on my YouTube page about from Zeus Legend about a game we ran where there was some background information that was provided by the characters. And the way this adventure kind of started was sort of in the middle of some chaos. And what was great about the backstory was immediately we started being able to place where those characters were and what they were doing, why they were there, why they were in certain places. And then so starting with that backstory that can really, in terms of like what those first 20 minutes are and how much is scripted, the backstory and what you get from your players really allows you to figure out kind of where this story starts.
Yeah, it's funny.
I like to jump on.
Okay, I was just going to ask a question for you guys, and you can jump in, Dean. I was going to ask, has this ever happened to you as a Cypher GM? It's happened to me plenty of times. Have you ever designed an encounter or a baddie that requires a specific skill, not knowing that one of the characters is specialized in that skill? And it's sort of like, like, hey, this creature's only gonna require speed defense rolls, and then you have that one guy that specializes in speed defense rolls and basically negates either the obstacle or the character.
Yes.
NPC.
Yep. I've had players completely in one round eliminate a boss with a Cypher.
And
So,
that was the. Oh, go ahead, Dean.
I was just gonna say I wanted to jump in there and add to what Claire and Anthony both said. Another thing I like to take away from players, especially if I know I'm going to run a campaign, is I want character motivations. I love to get background information. That's always been a thing. I've been doing it for a long time, and it started because I love superhero games. So I always wanted to have people write a background story for their characters as superheroes.
I think that might go in the player prep.
Well, no, it has nothing. No, I'm saying as a GM.
Yeah.
As a GM, I want that. I don't care about players for wanting to do it, their prep. I'm saying as a GM, I want them to do it because I want that canon. I want that fodder to build upon, because that's how, like I said, having a character's background, I can kind of craft some motivations to make it even more intimate. And I'm learning that Cypher System just lends itself to that wholeheartedly. Like when I do, I've even started doing it when I do character or one-shots. I literally do that. I will write a blurb so you have something and you can give me more if you want to.
So, like to touch on that so we could, steer it back to the concept of prep, right? So how do you incorporate that in your prep?
Well, for prime example, let's just say, prime example was the last game when we played the game, when I did the horror game, when you guys were all in the mall, when I did like the version of the Mist, and you said your character was you said your character was from New York. She was hard-nosed self-defense instructor for the people, for the women and stuff like this. That got integrated into the prep because that's when I said, oh, you know what, I gotta have the oily guy that's going to hit on her and, hitting on the other women to motivate your character to step up your game. Al's character was the guy who didn't do anything. I remember his,
but is it something that you do a mental note with? Because, ideally we're trying to.
Yeah. What I did was it was a mental note, but when everybody started saying those background key phrases for their character, it was like, okay, let me add something there. Okay, Al doesn't do much, so I got to find out what's his motivations because he doesn't do much. So when he told me all he liked to do was watch Netflix and chill, and order movies, I came up with a scene where it had something to do where he's like, oh, wait a minute, I need that Blu-ray, stuff like that. So those things are notes that get written down for me, because I want the characters to feel invested, even if it's a one shot.
It might be a good idea to have a list of NPCs and not necessarily using in the exact session, but have a list of NPCs, like say 10 NPCs for a 4 or 5 party group, and connect 2 of those NPCs to each party member. Whether you use it or not, it gets your mind going on, hey, this is a good connection. you know, whether you use those NPCs or not, it kind of forces your mind to think about how am I going to connect the personality or something that's on this character sheet in gameplay.
So I say it's either NPC or environment.
Yes.
Yeah, and you can do that really quick in the Cypher system because all you have to do is assign an NPC a level. You don't, if they are that important where they're going to need specific stats or specific modifications to what they do, then you can take the time to do that. But if you generate 5 NPCs and I go, okay, this one's level 2, this one's level 4, this one's a level 3, this one's a level 7, and this one's level 5. I have all the stats I need to run these NPCs now.
Yeah. And usually I personally find the throwaway NPC is the one that turns out to be the most memorable. Especially and reoccurring anyway. Like any NPC that I spend hours on developing is the gray guy or the red suit in Star Trek that
I've talked about this so many times. One of my earliest Cypher campaigns, I was running the fantasy game and a city guard ended up becoming the reoccurring NPC that plagued the party because, you know, somebody rolled a 1. And, you know, it was like, you know, what interesting complication could I come up with? So it ended up turning that NPC that was supposed to be just a throwaway guard into a rogue swordsman that had a rivalry with one of the characters. So he would pop up periodically after that. You know, he got an upgrade. So I agree with you 100% there.
Yeah, and I think that's very likely to happen, like in your example, because of like chance, like you roll a 1, that's going to be a memorable scene. But also I think like sometimes the NPCs that we don't put a lot of work into end up being very unique because we kind of take the stress out of making them. We put all of that stress and creative energy into making these elaborate NPCs, and sometimes that is really needed. But when you have an NPC that is just sort of off the cuff, sometimes that's the most organic role playing that you can get. And that really kind of leads into the fact that like session prep is just about like being prepared. It's not necessarily about like how clever or smart or creative you are. It's really about just, you know, putting in some story hooks or some frameworks, couple of rules and difficulty checks, and that's kind of all you need to just kind of sit down and run it, because you're going to get those 1s. You're going to get the player who's like really infatuated with a random NPC for some reason, and that is the story that starts getting told at that table.
Mm-hmm. Also, too, that's a great point, Claire. Also, too, I think it's also that the group helps develop this overall character. You know, the overall NPC's story arc. So the group takes onus on, like, it's almost like, you know, it's a shared narrative. And, you know, and that's just human nature. If you feel like you're part of the development of this character, you're more likely to be, you know, invested in either this character surviving or getting this character if it's even.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, literally, but you just said it, Anthony, that's true, because that NPC, like I said, he was not, I'd never even thought of it. It was in a moment of clarity when I realized that a GM intrusion didn't necessarily have to be, oh, he broke his sword or, oh, he tripped, you know, because the guy had already established his character. He had established that his character was, you know, one of the greatest swordsmen in the land, you know, and throughout the game, you know, like 4 or 5 sessions, he was doing phenomenal stuff. So it really would have been, I think it would have been cheapened. It would have cheapened the situation for him to break his sword or drop it or stumble or something corny. And it hit me, like I said, you know, so when he went to take the strike and the guy caught his sword and said, "You're not as good as you think you are," you know, and then the whole thing started, you know, developing. The guy, you know, the person in the game was talking about how he went to this particular school and trained under this particular swords master and so on and so forth. So I said his rival trained under the sword master of his master's biggest rival. And so, you know, it was just all of this, it just unfolded, but the player did a lot of that work. The players, actually.
Yeah, you kind of can't prep for a situation like that. Like they just happen.
Right.
You didn't answer the question.
Wait, which one?
What do you need to know for the players' character sheets to begin your event?
What you call it? Anthony had actually hit the nail on the head with my take on that, with his question about or, you know, if you've ever sat at the table and not know, you know, what a character did. My take is that you should always pay attention to that stuff, not to know what you call it, how to like put them down or make it harder or whatever have you. It's more to know or how to avoid things that they'll be able to go over very easily. Like you said, like you'll have this challenge in mind, but you won't know what the characters could do. You put this challenge in front of them, and then suddenly it's just one dice, or not even a dice roll. They just have this one unique ability, and it's just like, oh, it's actually gone. It's out of the way. And it's good to know that stuff so that, you know, this portion of the game that you had in mind that might take 30, 40 minutes is not shrunk down to 2 minutes because the character had this one ability that you weren't aware of.
Nice. All right, Al, so
Cypher, they all apply to that same concept.
So, yes. Al, I'm going to start you out with this one. This next one is a good one. Do you handle one-shot prep differently than you would handle a campaign?
You asked me, I guess I'm a good one to answer this first because I've never run a campaign, guys. I mean, I kind of have. Like, I had a home game for a little while where my coworkers were playing, but that game kind of fell apart. But in regards to that, I didn't really do it any differently. The only difference was I had information from the previous game to build on for the next game. That's really, and then I did it the same exact way. It's like, hey, they just did this. What do I want them to do next time? The end, like I always start. Where do I want them to end it next time? And the beginning is already fleshed out because the beginning is where they left off. And it's just easier. Like, I had an easier time going into the next session because, one, I already had the beginning because I knew where they were, what they were doing. The end, again, was always where I start, so that's always easy. It's like, hey, what's the next big thing they're going to do? And the middle is always vague, so I never had trouble with that either because they kind of fill that in as we go. Yeah.
You see, Claire, what'd you think?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the nature of the campaign you're running. I mean, some campaigns honestly are just a bunch of one-shots, you know, just kind of strung together. So it depends, I think, on whether or not you're running a campaign that is sort of like, you know, to borrow like a TV term, like a monster of the week sort of thing. You're kind of then preparing several one-shots, one after another for every week. But I think with campaigns, like what I will do is, especially ones that have been going on for some time, is I'm very watchful of what the specific narrative developments that need to happen, particularly if there are character arcs involved. And so I may prepare for a session where I'll think, okay, this character needs to speak with this NPC. That is the key thing that's going to happen in this chapter, episode, however you call it for your campaign, this evening or day or whatever. On this session, this character has to meet this character, or this character has to learn this thing. So with campaigns, I think they're often more focused around those characters, even if it's a newer campaign, right? It's focused on those character stories. Whereas a one shot, I will probably do more work on the setting than I will on the campaign. And I'll be like really clear about what the setting is, because if it's a one shot, like let's take Numenera for an example, you know, it's going to be about probably a single ruin, or it's going to be about some weird phenomena that needs to be like really understood by me in order to deliver that experience, as I need to focus on that probably a lot more than I would do for a campaign. Because the other thing with a campaign too, especially if it's gone on for some time, is that you have players and characters that have established rapport with one another. And so a lot of time will be dedicated to just kind of natural role play and decisions that are made based on characters that have a history that has been established in the game already. So having that in mind, depending on the level of that in a campaign, plays a significant role in how much I will prep for a specific, you know, chapter of an ongoing campaign.
And
yeah, Claire brought up the best point when she initially talked about campaigns. There's two different types of campaigns. It's like what Claire said. You have that campaign that's a series of one shots. So the prep for that is entirely different than it would be for one of those, you know, like character driven story arc campaigns that, you know, most people traditionally think of. For me, a one shot and a campaign, I think I have more prep in a one shot, to be honest, because with a one shot, I concentrate on story. The story I'm trying to tell is the most important thing. I have 4 hours to tell a complete narrative from beginning, middle, and
end. If you're lucky, it's 4 hours.
Yeah. So the majority of my prep is going to be making sure I have those plot points and how to get to those plot points as fast as I can, and what I need to highlight, right? With a campaign, it's more player driven.
Yeah.
So if that makes any sense, you know, you every episode or every session is designed, I'm a prep to highlight a specific character or two characters in the session itself. You know, so with a one-shot, you can't really worry about player, like, not that player input isn't important, but the narrative input is the most important thing in a one-shot because you want to tell a complete story. But with a campaign, you could do those character developments. So, you know, when I prep for a campaign, like say the second or third session, I'm going, okay, Claire had a spotlight in the first session. I am now going to highlight Dean and Al in this session. How can I do that? And that dictates how I prep. I don't know if I relate it correctly, but
I get it.
That makes sense.
It actually works because, you know, I was thinking about it, and I know for me it's always been different. Campaigns for me are always more about the world itself. I spend a lot of time developing the world, the aesthetics, the environment, you know, places that they can go, places that they can interact with, because I know the character development is going to happen. Like you said, it's driven. The characters are going to do things. They're going to make relationships. So I try to come up with like unique, I guess you can say unique placement pieces, items, places, people that are going to be in a campaign versus a one-shot where I do, like you said, Anthony, we focus on the players. We focus on...
No, it's the reverse.
I'm saying we focus on the narrative. I apologize. We focus on the narrative, the story that's going to be, the story that's going to be there. And, you know, hopefully the little one or two sentences I give you, you take those sentences and you build some interesting character ideology from it, and I can plug that in pretty quickly, you know. But I think I agree with everybody that the prep for a one-shot is a little bit more involved, because I know for a campaign, like I'm, you know, thinking about my Claim the Sky campaign that I want to run, and I've already got an idea, but it's all massive world ideology, what the world is and how the players are going to insert themselves into this world. And that's, you know, if that's, you know, if that makes sense, you know.
You know what's another thing that we should touch on, because I think this is very important. When you prep for a campaign, a lot of your prep, believe it or not, is front loaded. You know, like if you prep monster stat blocks, cipher tables, you know, NPCs, equipment lists, that prep might take hours in the very first or second session, but it's there for you to use for the entire campaign.
Yes.
So, you know, the prep actually lessens as the game progresses into more and more sessions.
Yeah, there were some questions I had got about like preparing loot, or specifically with ciphers, right? How do you prepare your ciphers? And like before I do a campaign, I will sit there with an Excel sheet and I will just sort all the ciphers that I'm using into like different meta categories. So I'll have like, okay, these ciphers do damage and they work for combat. These ciphers are restorative. These ciphers are buffs or debuffs. These work with narrative. And now I have like a bird's eye view of what I can pull from. But since I did that work ahead of time, when I go to prep for a future campaign session, I have that work done and I can go and look back on it.
You know what I did for the Tolis game that I haven't done in a long time? I prepped 4 tables, right? Each 4 D20. I prepped because, you know, Tolis is fantasy, and it's been a while since, you know, I've dipped in the, you know, fantasy waters. So what I did was I came up in my mind to make it easier for me to explain the ciphers. I came up with high ciphers, mid-tier ciphers, low ciphers, and then healing potions are basically abundant, you know, so I didn't count that in my cipher list. So, you know, when you fought something that's I would consider high tier, I'll make you roll on the high tier cipher table. If you fought something that you found something I would consider mid tier, I'll make you roll on the mid tier cipher level, and they all different ranges of power. So, you know, essentially, it gave me 4 tables of 80 ciphers that I could filter through on the fly, you know, without having to worry about. And they all ciphers that I'm aware of because you know, I put them in the list. So I know what they do.
Yes.
And something else that brings up, you know, when you were saying, the nice thing too about, you know, a campaign is that, like you said, all that front-loaded work you do, when you get ready to prepare for your next session, it's really, oh, look, okay, let me add that.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah.
It truly takes the, you know, when you know you're meeting weekly, monthly, whatever for this particular game, it takes so much of the stress off of you because, like you said, you do the brunt of it in the beginning. And only when, like, if the players do something and you know what, they end up bringing an element that you didn't expect, where you're going to go, you know what, I'm going to prep this for a crazy, you know, subplot adventure or subplot activity, you know, or, you know, those are when the extra prep come in. And I mean, now with, you know, tools like the Darkest House and stuff like that, if you wanted to plug something in like that, something special, that's where your prep.
Yeah, I mean, because you want to reward player curiosity, you know. So like we have to, you know, in Numenera we have oddities, and oddities do all sorts of things. And you know, if someone goes into a room and they find an oddity, maybe sometimes it is appropriate for that oddity to just be another weird aspect of the world. Or you want to reward that, and you want to think, okay, well, what's that connected to? And maybe you'll come back to that, and you have the freedom with campaign prep to think several sessions ahead of time, which is, I think, kind of what you were speaking to, Anthony, with like the one shot, is that like you kind of have to deliver a beginning, middle, and an end. Campaign sessions can kind of end without resolution sometimes because you know you're going to come back to it.
I mean,
you know, Claire, it's funny. I was just telling Claire, it's funny that you even brought that up, because before we got Voices of the Data Sphere, I had a character have an oddity that they used to be able to use, but the oddity allowed them to become a virtual character.
Yeah.
You know, and they would be on this computer screen, and I was like, what am I going to do with this? But now we got Voices of the Data Sphere.
Voices of the Data Sphere will help a lot with that. Yeah.
Yeah, you can, you know, really plug something in like that. But this was just a fun oddity, but it came into play because the guy would use it. He was a jack, and that was one of the ways he used to use it to get into places.
Nice.
So he would be this holographic, you know, virtual characters. Hey, look at this. And they take it into the place he wanted to go, you know, so stuff like that.
When Claire mentioned oddities, we're going to jump. I think this is a good time to ask this question. How do you guys handle monster stat blocks, GM intrusions, ciphers, and oddities when you prep?
I mean, it's what you said earlier, as far as I go anyway. I'll prep, well, as far as ciphers and items or whatever have you go, I'll go through whatever relevant books. I'll pull out ones I like, make up my own little list, and I'll have that available to use, you know, throughout the game if I need it. However, I will say that if I have ideas based on the setting or game that I'm running for my own ciphers, I will definitely make them. Again, it really depends on the setting and inspiration. Sometimes I don't, sometimes I do. But, yeah, you definitely want any ones you create to be very different from ones you're pulling from the book. Because you could just pull more from the book if they're going to be like from the book. I will say for monster stat blocks, though, I don't look at the books at all. I know you guys have mentioned you reskin monsters, so on and so forth. You make your own, too. I might look at a picture for inspiration, but I don't look at the stats or anything like that from a book. All that stuff, I make up levels, what they can do, all on my own. It's just, personally, I have fun with that. And another thing is, when you have your own creation, at least this is my, I guess, thinking on it. When you make your own monster or stat block, whatever, a player can't be like, hey, that's not the stats from the book. It's like, hey, I made that up. Like, you can't, there's no wiggle room for an argument or anything like that. It's like, hey, the thing's supposed to have 12 HP. I hit it for 18. It's like, buddy, it's my creation. But aside from that, yeah, I mean, you just pull stuff, have it ready on the side from the books, and yeah, monster stuff, I'll just make it up on. And if I need to, I'll make it up on the fly. Like, should they decide they want to go someplace I didn't plan for, or I'll just make up a monster or something just right on the. It's so easy with Cypher System. Give it a level, maybe something cool it can do. That's it.
It's funny that you bring that particular topic up in general, Anthony, because there was a big discussion on the channel about why is there 3 monster books and there's no XP for monsters and stuff like that. This isn't the thrust of Numenera, so on and so forth. And, you know, I found it interesting. I was at work, so I couldn't really comment, but the way I look at the monster stat blocks is kind of similar to Al. They're there for inspiration. You know what I can use, and I can, not only are they there for inspiration, but they're also there to be set pieces and obstacles and so on and so forth. No, you don't necessarily get XP for defeating the monster, but let's just say, you know, there's a gargantuan, you know, mile-long, you know, kraken blocking the entrance to where you have to go. You know, it's a level 10 creature. What are you going to do to get past it? Because you're not necessarily going to fight it at tier 1. You know, so I look at monsters and stat blocks as nothing more than set pieces, you know. And I also, you know that too, I'm also in the camp with Al that I like to make stuff up. You know, you guys were fighting that dreadnought in that one superhero GM roulette we did, and Al or somebody was using their car as a weapon, and it was a very creative use of how they were doing it. So I had to adjust this monster on the fly, but to make it seem organic. So the last time that they dropped the car on the dreadnought, he broke up into a bunch of mini spider-like creatures. You know, so he went from being this one big target to a swarm. So, you know, me making that myself, I was able to do that on the fly, still make it interesting. It didn't come across as crappy. And
let's bring it up prep, because it seems like we steering into the conversation of improv, and you know, I want to at least be you know, like informative on someone that's trying to prep.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's for prep purposes. That's why I create what I do.
What do you do? That's very vague. You know, like, what's the process? Like,
I can stress that. Yeah. like for me, I have gotten a lot more. Like I've gotten way more involved in how I prep monsters. One of them was actually something I got from you, Dean, which was, I think, on an episode you had talked about giving ciphers to the monsters as powers. And once I started doing that, that opened a whole can of worms for me to just sit down and like flip through the Cypher book and figure out what crazy powers do these monsters have. And the other thing I've also been doing is really being very liberal with what you can do with modifications. Every Cypher System stat has modifications, and I choose to make those modifications very dynamic. So like perhaps you have a character who has like carbon fiber armor. Well, maybe when it's in an armor phase, it gives them 5 armor, but then they could also like take that carbon fiber and turn it into like knives or something like that. And now their armor will go down, but their damage will go up. Mm-hmm. And so you can think of like interesting ways that you can move around kind of the base numbers, which is like level to hit, how much health, how much damage, how much armor, and start thinking of like creative things that this opposition can do in the moment. And you also have GM intrusions, which could be for, think about like a classic Final Fantasy game, right? Where you've got like the boss has that one epic move that they do where you're like, oh, fuck. That is what a GM intrusion is really good for. And you can kind of go in there and like specify the numbers for what they do. And because there's so few stats for the Cypher system, like you can get a lot of mileage out of just saying like, well, the character, develops new armor or develops a new set of weapons or multiplies or goes invisible or something like that.
Do you prep GM intrusions?
Sometimes.
I would lie. It would be a lie if I said I prep GM intrusions, but I do think of this would be cool if this happened somehow in the adventure. And then it might be an idea that I had for a scene that later becomes a GM intrusion.
It's funny, you talk about prep and GM intrusions. I just have a sheet that I keep most of the time, and I write down things that you guys say. My players kind of prep my GM intrusions as we go along, because people will say something and not even really like, oh, good idea for a GM intrusion. Let me write that down and save it for later.
That's a good idea.
So I have a list. So I do have a list that I bring to the table of things that have been said throughout all my Cypher games over the last couple of years that players have said. So I have that list prepped. but it's always growing because players will come up with stuff all the time. People will say something. I mean, Claire, what you just were talking about, and it's funny because I do it because I think about a specific type of character, and I'll go, okay, they can do this, 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 and this. But what you just said about literally sitting there and putting it down, like this particular NPC might do this or this or this, I'm gonna have to steal that. Good stuff.
You know, another form of prep to me, if we're talking about like this like group of monster stat blocks, GM intrusions, ciphers, is I read through the monster manual and I consider that prep. Because I might not use any of the stat blocks in there or any of the creatures in there, especially the Numenera ones, but it gives me ideas to either reflavor a current concept I have or to introduce some elements of the monster that I'm reading, the stat block, but then, like what Claire said, change it and, you know, warp it into my own creation.
Yeah, well, I told you that's what they were.
I think with that,
books are inspirations.
With that, I think it's really important to think about like what is the theater that you are delivering. So if you're running like Numenera, like if you want to really deliver the theater of the setting as it's written in the books, you might want to pay close attention to those monster stat blocks, right? Because you have something like, say, like a Nabovian wife or something like that, right? Like that is sort of that is a fixture of that setting. That is something that someone may come to that setting to experience, is that kind of particular monster. So if you're running a setting like that, where it's very much about the lore and the canon that's written in the books, it's a really good idea to stick to those monsters, because that could be what people are expecting. Or if you're, you know, like what I mostly do is kind of use the setting as a giant canvas in the background, and I come up with my own monsters half the time. So,
and I have to say this too, we're talking about prep. Honestly, guys, I've actually found that I really enjoy some of those third-party things, like the story engine. I love that. They're getting ready to come. The world engine stuff is getting ready to come soon. I just got the PDFs for that. And then I just got these things called monster descriptor cards.
Well, even the Cypher cards, Dean. That's
those two. That's what I'm saying. But I was saying outside of what Cypher offers, but Cypher itself, yes, their cards, those things like that they're just like plethoras of inspiration and easy plug and play. You know,
they cut down on prep since we discussed it.
Right. Well, I mean, like I said, because the monster descriptor cards, I love those because, like, for a horror game that I want to run, I haven't done it yet, but I can't wait to be able to use it because I'm just going to create the monsters right there in the moment. You know, it's going to be great.
Al, you want to read Bunny of Doom just asked the question? You want to read it?
Yep. So it's actually a great question, and it definitely does relate here. It is definitely part of certain aspects of prep. But yeah, let me just go ahead and read that. They're just saying that they want to do a bit of world building with their players before they actually start playing. Do we have any tips, suggestions, supplemental materials, or games that might aid in such an endeavor? How much should I involve the players in world building? I want to try to get my players a little more invested, bought into the world. Yeah, that's definitely something you can do, something that's actually awesome if your players are engaged enough to do it. Some players are like, and this is more of a D&D thing, they just want to hit and kill things. But if you have players who are very into the narrative, into what's going on in the world or how the world is, yeah, that's definitely awesome. Have a session 0, discuss what might happen in the world. I believe there's, again, I don't know the name of a game. One of y'all could probably help me here. I feel like there's a game where you work together to actually build a world. I'm blanking on the name of it though. It's like
I was gonna say Numenera Destiny.
No. It's like you go. What is
Microscope.
it?
Microscope.
Yes, that's it. Microscope.
Yes, there's
that's a good one.
But or you could even just go online and steal the old life path random charts from Cyberpunk. Those life path charts will help you develop. It'll help the players develop their characters, but it'll also give you points to develop in the world. Mm-hmm. And you know those investitures are pretty cool too. And it also brings your players, you know, together as well. It builds a history with the characters as well.
I think I'll answer it a little differently. You know, I'm all about the fast and dirty resolution. So I would say flat out ask. It depends on the scope or how much world building you want to have them be part of. But I would say if you want them to have a major part in the world building, give them a continent and tell them to tell you what's going on in that continent. And then after you gathered all that information, you start crafting from after what they gave you. Like, like let them do the work for you.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is definitely a truth there as well.
Yeah, and I would say for world. Yeah, go ahead, Dean.
I was just saying that's also for you too. How much of the world are you willing to give over?
Right.
Because what Anthony is saying is it works. It is magnificent, but it also can be a little. It takes some of your ownership away. But then again,
I've never really.
No, I'm not saying. I'm not saying
what you're saying, but
I'm just saying for the person. So you have to be able to relate to that as well. You have to be able to be the type of person that's going to open your arms and embrace what they give you.
No, it could be a continent, it could be a town, it could be a province, depending on what setting you're running. And you don't necessarily have to start the game with the information they gave you. It's just established lore that they created. So now you have all this work prep, because it leads back into prep. You have all this prep done for you beforehand by the players that you could gradually put into the narrative as you see fit. So if they give you an idea that you really love, you could run with it from the very beginning. But if they give you a bunch of ideas that may not be cohesive with what your overall story is, you could gradually sprinkle it in, and the players will appreciate what they created is involved in the story.
Yeah, and I would say, with respects to world building, like what I am often more concerned about, like I care less about the names of like fictional places more than I care more about the genre and the atmosphere of it. So take Ptolis, for example. Ptolis is an enormous setting. It takes a long time to get through it all. For me, it's more important whether or not, I convey to the players what it's like to walk the streets of Ptolis and have that spire looming over you all the time, or what it's like to constantly be in this environment that's kind of gloomy and rainy. What does it feel like to pass through different districts? It doesn't matter what the hell the districts are called technically. I mean, you'll get those right. You can look at a book, or you can come up with a new name on the spot. But to me, what's often most important is like, how are you conveying the feel of that? And to me, that is just about spending time sitting down with the genre and like just soaking in the atmosphere of that genre. But as a world building exercise, what I would really recommend is build a cyberpunk setting, because cyberpunk settings are very specific in terms of you need corporation names. So you can come up with a bunch of corporation names and what those corporations make. And usually cyberpunk settings tend to have like, there was a war before everything happened, and that's how the countries fell apart and the corporations stood in. So like if you take and that's again to the spirit of genre, like understanding what is expected of the genre. Cyberpunk is a really good place to get your feet wet with world building, because it is so on its face, like it screams world building, like right to your face, because it's pasted all over all of the buildings. So if you can build like a simple cyberpunk concept, that's a good way to start thinking of more advanced genres and settings.
And I'll just throw this out here since you brought up cyberpunk. Our good people over at Marlowe House have great products coming out right now. They've got two shots out already for cyberpunk style games. He's calling it technopunk, but it's the same principle, same concept. It's a couple of great supplements. They're not expensive. Look on Drive-Thru RPG. Good stuff, and it will help you a lot. But I have to agree with Claire. Building for cyberpunk is probably one of the most involved, but easy, because a lot of the concepts also are relevant. They're today, and they could be tomorrow. And not so far tomorrow. So that's good place to start. Excellent.
Yeah, like if you think of the name of a corporation, and okay, what do they make? Well, they make cars. Okay, what's a model of the car? Well, we'll call it the Firebird. Okay, where is the Firebird made? Well, it's on Mulberry Street. You can start like just kind of chaining stuff like that. And cyberpunk works really well. There are a few other genres that do that too, but cyberpunk is a good place if you're trying to comprehend world building and coming up with connections between that stuff. And then you ask your players to insert themselves there.
Yep.
So, Bunny of Doom, I hope we were able to help you out somewhat. But at the end of the day, it's what you're most comfortable with and what the players are comfortable contributing to. So, be sure to let us know if any of the advice we gave you you're going to use, or you're just going to throw away. That's okay too. But let's go back to game prep. We have like 2 more GM questions that I want to steer us back into. Before I ask my last question, this question I think comes up is very important. But do you approach prepping differently between an online game and an in-person game?
Yep, I do. And only in the sense that in-person games, I love props. And so I'm out gathering stuff. What can I use? I want to make unique things. I love to set up a table. I love to set up like my major scene on the table and stuff like that, even though it's Cypher and you don't have to worry about, distances and ranges the same way. But I think that's just one of the things that I love to do. Now, as far as online prep, I'm actually getting better at it because, now I'm starting to realize, what? Images, maps, those things are cool too. Those things work. Another thing I really dig about that I'm starting to dig into with online gaming is atmospheric tools, sound effects, music. These are things that I'm going to start playing with. I mean, I'm like getting really ambitious with this online thing. I want to do some new stuff, but it's 2 different kind of mindsets because I'm looking for physical things in one place, and now I've moved into a realm where I'm looking at, digital stuff, and it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff available to you. So yeah. That's me.
How about you, Albert? I know me and Claire have some serious opinions on this.
My answer is very, very simple, very straightforward. I'm just as lazy online as I am offline. I prep the same amount of paperwork. Well, okay, one thing I will say is different. I like having physical character sheets, so I will print out character sheets.
Yes.
And depending on the game, like for instance, my home game, I did have minis because I had toys. Like, it's not something I went out and bought to play the game. It's just I had it, so I used it. That's about it, really. It's all the same.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, for in-person games, like just like you, Dean, I love props. If you played games with me at Gen Con, like if you played the Numenera adventure, everyone got a slip of paper that had one of the rumors you heard about Tando, and you read that to yourself. And then when role play started, everyone got to say kind of what they heard, which was just a bunch of papers that I shuffled, and you heard one of the rumors, and maybe someone got, and maybe 2 people got the same rumor. And so then when one person is like, oh, well, I heard this, and then someone can be like, oh, well, I heard that too. Or if you played in the Tolas games I ran, I actually printed out a physical copy of Fulton's journal that had the little excerpts on there. And then what I actually did was I scrambled them up so that when they were going into each room, they had to like sit down and figure out, wait, okay, is this the room we're in? Yes, this is the room with the blue door. And that sort of thing is a lot more fun in person when there's like a physical thing for people to pass around and reference and point at and look at and write on. That's a huge thing. With online games, I have progressively gotten more simple in my prep. I don't really use VTTs anymore. I've stopped using Roll20 entirely. I have a Foundry instance that I use for 5e for the maps. Because if you're doing like, if you're doing standard D&D map stuff, sometimes you do need that map there, particularly if it's like specific abilities that are like so-and-so has to be this many squares away. Okay, well, that's how that ability functions. So you should have that. But I've gotten to the point where I keep character information in a simple text file that is kilobytes to share. It takes no space to send that to someone in a Discord message or something like that. So my prep with online stuff is like keep things simple. I use Notion, which is a favorite among a lot of people, and I try to keep that simple too, because once you have these any VTTs or any note-taking app, that stuff can get complex really, 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 really fast. And there is nothing worse, even if like I have 2 monitors, and even with 2 monitors, I have run online games where I've gotten lost flipping through my windows on the screens because I've got so many freaking things open. I've got, 8 notepad files open. I've got Notion open. So with online stuff, for me, the prep is very much focused on keeping things as simple as possible so that I could just have a screen open with everyone's face on there. And then over on this screen, I will have as direct access as I can get to that stuff. And in person, I'll have more props and things like that because you have that freedom when you're in person.
I am the opposite side of the spectrum when it comes to online players. I am the guy with the 500 images in the database for every instance that may come up. One of the reasons why I love VTTs is that I think it saves time in the description of scenes and people when you have an image just to throw up. Like what does this magic shot look like? It looks like this. Let's keep on moving. I'm giving you an exact image. So Dean knows I have over 500 different images for every type of genre you can imagine, and I'll load up 40 or 50 of them for a session. I might use 5 or 6, but I'll have 50 load up on roll 20 just in case someone asks me, what does that bum look like? That bum looks like this. It saves me time. And it also, I just think online, it's a lot harder to hold someone's attention when they're looking at a screen for 4 hours. So if you're changing the images, you hold the player's attention more, especially if you're constantly changing. It's an easier way to keep players focused. That's one of the reasons. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but that's why I like to use it.
I said, I'm just trying to get comfortable. Once I get comfortable, I'll be all right.
I also like sound effects. I also like music. I'm always what you call it, trying to look for ways to hold the player's attention online, because I do think it's a lot harder for a player to focus online than it is in person. And in person, I'm more of the theater of the mind kind of guy. I might do some handouts, but I do way more work, in terms of prep and in terms of preparation online. It's not even close.
See, like I said, I'm just looking at this wall alone. We won't even talk about what's behind me. It's like, wow, I got stuff. So, but I think it's all good. I asked that major league question there, Anthony, that last one?
Oh, for new player?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, guys.
Actually, we have 2 questions.
We do? Which one do we miss?
Oh, wait a second.
What is the most important thing you feel you must prep before any session if you have limited time?
Oh, go ahead.
Me, that's easy. I said it before. It's my opening scene. I'm comfortable running the entire session improv as long as I have my first 20 minutes scripted.
Most of the time, I don't have...
Was the stream down?
Yeah, 1 second. No, just keep talking. I'm going to turn the stream on and off. I'm still recording, though, so let's just keep going.
Well, for me, it's very simple. I don't have anything that I think I should, that I have a number one thing that I got to prep, because over the years, I've been, delusional. I was always the longtime GM, and my friends out of nowhere would be, hey, let's play. So I would have to come up with something in, 10 or 15 minutes, so I was always the guy. The biggest thing I have to prep is always making sure I've got dice nearby. That's my thing. And now with electronic devices, cell phones and tablets and stuff, I can pull up any book or whatever I need, because I have everything digitally.
Quick question to the audience. Did you guys hear what Dean said?
Well, it's okay if not, because again, the recording did not stop, so the video will be good for YouTube. So that's thumbs up. But yeah, I don't know what's going on with OBS right now.
I don't think they heard what Dean said. But basically, what I said was I prepped my opening scene. That's the most important thing to me. I'm comfortable improving the next 3.5 hours as long as I know my first 30 minutes are pretty much scripted.
And I basically said that I don't really have any major thing that I need to prep because I'm so used to being asked to run things out of nowhere. You know, I've been the long time GM that's done it, 15 minutes and we got a game going.
Yeah, I tend like opening scenes are very important. I like to make sure that I have an idea of what the ABC kind of flow of the story is, at least if I just a bare outline to know like, okay, they go into this room and they go into that room and they go into this room and they go into that room and get an idea of what that is. But if I'm really pressed for time, the thing I enjoy doing the most is just kind of getting excited about running the adventure. Will sort of like get you in the headspace, like being in that headspace and being ready to run a game. It's like sometimes way the hell more important than what's in the room. And so like if I'm pressed for time, I will like put on some music that I think fits the adventure, and I'll just kind of zone out to that, and I'll imagine who these characters are. I'll imagine them in scenes, and I'll get excited about running the story for these characters. And more often than not, that is all I need.
I mean, that's great advice. Yeah, because if you're mentally checked out, the session's gonna stink anyway. It doesn't matter.
Even if you have everything written down in every single room, if you are not in the right headspace to run a game, it's not going to be a great game.
Yeah, no matter what you do.
Yeah.
How about you, Al?
Yeah, if I'm pressed for time, I think again I basically prep already like I'm pressed for time, so it's not too bad actually, because again I don't do much of the preparation, but again, well, like I said before, the most important thing, if I am actually limited on what I can actually prepare, not prepare, whatever, I like to have a very thought out, or I don't know, planned, or I don't know, I'm using poor words for this, but the end scene, like whether it's the big baddie or the obstacle or conflict they're gonna have to go through at the end, that's probably what I spend the most time thinking about before starting a game with very limited time. Because again, the beginning, the middle, all that stuff can be filled in by the players. Even if you don't have a great, like again, Anthony likes to have a scripted beginning. Even if you don't have that scripted beginning, at least for me, the most cool part is seeing how it all resolves at the end, and I like to have something cool going on there, so I'll think more on that than the beginning if I have limited time.
You know what's funny, and this is a perfect lead into our last question, but all four of us have different answers. Yeah. So that right there tells you there is no right or wrong way.
There is no right way to do it.
No, never, definitely not. So with that being said, Anthony, if there was any advice you could give a first-time GM about prep, what would it be?
I cannot stress this enough, and this annoys me to no end when I hear a new player ask for prep as much or as little that makes you comfortable to run the session. This is just a pet peeve of mine. We'll get a new person ask a question and someone tells you this is the way you got to do it. No. Do what makes you comfortable. If you're the kind of person that needs to write 15 pages of backstory to be comfortable, then that's okay. If you're the kind of person that has 3 bar napkins with 3 things written on it and you're ready to rock and roll, that's okay too. Never let someone else dictate to you how you should prep. And the last but not least is make sure that you're having fun. Yeah. If you're having fun, everything else will fall into place. But I cannot stress that enough. Prep as much as what makes you comfortable to run your session.
Clear?
This is for new GMs. Best advice. Like I said before, get excited about the setting, get excited about the genre you're running. Like really get kind of emotionally and creatively in tune with that, because that is way more important than the rules. It is substantially more important. If you're running something for like organized play, or you're doing a convention game, sure, the rules are a bit more important there. But if you're running for friends, if you're running for, people, it is more about like delivering a really great experience. So, try to be as one with kind of that genre and that setting, and get excited about it. Get excited about running cool encounters and cool scenes and giving your players interesting hooks for them to follow, because you have to remember, like, yes, you are playing the role of GM, which comes with like a couple of more responsibilities than it does for a player. but there's also like at least 3 other people at the table with you. It is a collaborative storytelling exercise. The burden is not 100% on you. You just have to kind of guide the setting and guide the story. That's really what you're responsible for. And it gets, you know, you get better with it the more you do. And you're going to have some sessions that were not so great. You're going to have some sessions that were fantastic. And just sticking with it and keeping up with it, that's how you kind of become better at this whole thing.
And I will say that my biggest piece of advice is don't stress out about it. Don't get too caught in your head about prepping the right things, whatever have you. You don't even have to name all the NPCs or places. You can leave those things blank. Let your players name them on the fly. Just the biggest thing is don't fret too much, because anything you're missing can be filled in by the players. It's not the end of the world if you don't have a name for something or you don't know what a certain thing looks like. The players will tell you.
Yeah. And I'm going to say, let's take everything that these 3 guys said, let's roll it up into a big ball and embrace it, because that is the reality. And the only other thing I would add to that is, if this is your first time out of the gate, I mean, and when I say first time, I'm talking about first time GM period, not that you've played other games or, you know, I'm not saying this is your first Cypher. I'm saying just out of the gate. I would suggest getting a pre-written adventure, you know, just get a pre-written adventure and get your feet wet. Know you're going to make mistakes. Know that, you know, it probably ain't going to flow the way you wanted to flow the first time. It's not going to be a Matt Mercer stream the first time out the gate. It's just not going to be that. Okay. Remember that. And when you remember that and embrace it, you're going to have a blast, because that's what we all say. That's our biggest thing. We want you to have fun. We want to have fun. I personally love playing with first-time GMs, because you know what, you guys teach me things. You really do, because some of the times, some of the mistakes you make are brilliant, you know, and some of the times the off-kilter idea, okay, well, maybe that'll work like this. And then after the session, trust me, I'm never going to interrupt you in the middle of your session. I'm gonna let you do your thing. And then at the end, we're going to talk about it if you want to talk. Because that's what I think it should. So, you know, first time GMs, just have a blast. Embrace these ideas that these other great GMs on this screen have shared with you. And we keep that moving. So.
Yeah. That's great.
Al?
Yeah, so now that we've hit the GM side, let's talk about the player side. Because there's definitely some prep involved in that as well. Because you as a player should be prepared as well. And let's just start right off the gate. But what should you know beforehand as a player before you start your session?
Where my character fits in this world.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
I mean, that's one of the first things I'm going to ask. You know, want to know if the GM is giving us that or whatever. Where do I fit? You know, and I think that's a huge thing to think about for your character.
That's a good one.
I'm just going to piggyback on what Dean said, like at the very beginning of this video, is how you connected to other characters and what is your backstory?
Mm-hmm.
And does your GM know your backstory? And if your GM doesn't know your backstory, a good form of prep is reminding them before the session starts. Hey, look, I know we're doing this sewer adventure, but don't forget my character, you know, lived in the sewer for 2 months or whatever it is. You know your backstory and give your GM something to work with in the backstory.
And I do kind of think of that stuff, just not it's not the first thing I think of when I'm like a new player in someone's game or something like that. It's definitely good to think about, but for me, it's important to know exactly what your character does. So like, you know what all the abilities do, you know what skills you're trained in, all that good stuff, so that when a situation arises, you're not like, oh wait, am I trained at jumping? Or, you know, you're not second guessing. It's like they tell you, hey, this is the jumping skill I have. Oh yeah, I'm trained. It's not like, oh, shuffling through your sheets, am I trained at this? Or you should know that.
I think that was part of our second question now, but
I'm just saying that's what I look at.
Yeah, I encourage players to know their skills before they know kind of anything else in terms of their abilities, because your skills are going to really, they are what your characters are good at, great at, and not so great at. And so knowing what your skills are, I mean, for example, in the Tolis game, you know, that we've been playing, Anthony, like my character is trained in history. And so when she engages in dialogue with people, she's often asking historical questions. And that is like narratively who she is. And that's also me as a player going, oh, I have an advantage here. So if I can get a scenario that falls under some type of historical thing, I reduce that difficulty by one step. So knowing your skills is essential. And then the other thing I would say is like, look for the story that gets told across your abilities. And this is sort of a mechanical thing of being prepared, but like understand what your actions are and what your enablers are, because those can often chain off of one another. And you want to look at, so for example, to bring up the Tolis game again, you know, I had used foil danger to force a guard to not be able to draw his sword. And then I immediately used fleet of foot. And I did that all as one action because foil danger is an action and fleet of foot is an enabler. So when you start looking for how those abilities can interact, you can start thinking of interesting little scenes and little things that your character can do that will tell the story. So skills and knowing how your abilities work together and what stories your character sheet is kind of telling just by reading it is really important.
I mean, that's a great point that you bring up. Not only is it great from a narrative sense, right? You know, understanding what your character is capable of and knowing how abilities could interact with each other. It's also great for the actual pace of the game. When you know, when you as a character, if you did this prep work, it's no longer, let me think about what I'm gonna do. I'm doing this, this, and this, allowing the GM to react. And it actually, you know, it keeps everyone in the moment and it keeps the scene flowing consecutively if everyone is familiar with their abilities and we don't have that 5 or 10 second stoppage of Claire just did this, the NPC just did this, let me look at my sheet and think about what I'm going to do. It, you know, it kills the, you know, momentum that the whole scene is building.
Yeah, and that's going to happen anyway. You're going to have those moments where you're like, what do I do? I need to look at my sheet. That's going to happen. So the more you can do to mitigate that, the more fun you're going to have at the table.
I think, Claire, you hit the nail on the head. And I think it's something that goes right along with that concept that I always talk about, the paradigm shift. When you start looking at your character sheet less as a informational piece and as a script, you know, as a place that's literally giving you cues to how you want to operate. And I think if we could all, you know, start doing something like that, as opposed to, you know, well, you know, it's a bunch of quantified pieces, and see it as a cohesive whole, you know. And I think that happens too as you play longer. You know, it's kind of hard to do it maybe in a one shot, but if you know you're going to get 3, 4, 6 sessions in, you become very intimate with the ideology and the functionality of that particular sheet. So I think those are things to think about.
If you take the time to prep and think about your sheet, you could do it in a one shot too.
Oh no, I'm not saying you can't.
That's the whole concept of prepping, like the concept of a player prepping for a session.
Oh no, I'm not saying you can't, but I'm saying I'm just saying over time it becomes even easier because of course things are going to be added as well. But yeah, absolutely. You know,
I mean, we kind of answered sort of this question, but when you look at your character, what are you thinking about when you look at your character sheet before a game? I know we talked about abilities and skills, but you know, it's important to also look at ciphers and what your ciphers do, how many XP you have, what's your effort and edge, you know, like how many edge points, how is the personality, the statistical numeric numbers on your character sheet, how does it engage or develop your personality in the session? Because it's like what Dean said, they are numbers, but those numbers could tell you a specific way of how to play your character.
Yeah. One of the things like I'll say that I do when I play Cypher, which is not often enough, is I will like run hypothetical scenarios. And an easy way to run hypothetical scenarios is to think about combat, because combat's a binary yes, no, either it hits or it doesn't hit. So think about like, okay, how could my character reduce a difficulty 5 enemy way down so that it's an easy roll or a free roll, and how many points does that take out? So you already start like anticipating move sets you're going to do. So like, again, with the Tolus game that we're playing, like I know, like I've designed that character to have a lot of high speed and have a high edge and speed. And so what that means is like, I know I've got speed to burn. I can get into a fight really quick. I can get out of one really quick. I've got enough to like burn effort for initiative so that I can be the first one to make an attack. And I know, and I'm familiar because I'll sit down and I'll do the math real quick to figure out like, how much is this going to reduce my speed pool by? When do I need to start worrying? And you can start thinking about like, how much can I do before I'm kind of in some trouble? And as a quick thing with like, memorizing levels of effort, like the numerical sequence 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13 is all you need to memorize for levels of effort. So 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13, because you can only ever do 6 levels of effort. So if you just memorize that sequence of numbers and you go, okay, I'm going to put 2 levels of effort into that. Well, 3, 5, that's 5 points in total. So, and doing little tricks like that is really helpful.
And that's also player prep.
Yep.
And what's really funny, Claire, that you even said that could be something that we hand out to our players. Just think about it. That could just be a little cheat sheet. Here you go.
Yep.
Real quick. Dirty and quick. But like things on the character sheet, I'm with Anthony, where having an understanding of what is there, where and if you know what's there, it does become less about looking at the sheet and figuring out in the moment. Because, and what you said, Claire, about hypotheticals, I run my hypotheticals. I don't even necessarily run them as combat. I just run them as the type of character that I'm playing. Like with the one game I played with Anthony, my character was playing a jock, and we were in a big ass tank, and there was a shark in the tank, and it was like, okay, what would this crazy jock do to get away from here? And somebody set a grenade off, and he's like, I got a grappling hook, and he rides the crack in the tank down with a big old shark coming down on his head. It's just those moments you think about, what type of things would your character do, the type of character you are. But same thing you did, lots of speed, in and out quick, same principalities.
Yeah, and knowing when you are approaching dropping on the damage track, like knowing how many times can you burn effort, how many times can you get away with these abilities. But something I really want to add that I think, and I've been doing this to all my players, is I make them which sounds very cruel, but that I make them do things. But I ask them to list major and minor effects, because there is nothing kind of funnier at a Cypher System game than rolling a 19 or a 20 and being like, oh, well, what's the major effect? And the best way to mitigate that as a player is to like come up with a list. I mean, it's in the book. You can look. There's a whole selection of things you can do, and you can take those and you can code those into your character. So if you roll a 19, maybe if we'll just take the doing extra damage, right? So you're doing 3 extra damage. Well, why do you do 3 extra damage? What is your weapon capable of that you're doing extra damage? Does it if it's a gun, does it have like does it have a scope or something that you can use for higher aiming? And so your 19 is not just the minor effect, but you're actually you're coming up with interesting narrative things to tack onto it, and then you're prepared for when that 19 or 20 rolls or shows up on the roll, so that you're ready to go. And it doesn't have to be this weird moment where it's like, I don't know what to do.
I've never prepped. That's interesting, because I've never prepped minor and major effects as a player. I might have jotted down ideas as a GM, but as a player, I've never really done much thought to that. And I think I should start doing that, because I tend to want to improv what my minor and major effect is on the fly.
And you can always improv them. Like they are, the nature of those things is that they are improv, but you can do a little bit of prep ahead of time too.
No, that's actually a really good idea.
It's something that, like I said, that's why I love these discussions, because you pick up things that you don't think about, which make perfect sense. I mean, when you were just saying it, I was thinking about it, oh, wow, I got a gun. How would I explain extra? Oh, hollow points. Or, I got, different types of round. You made me automatically, I just started thinking And I've thought about like 12 or 13 different minor and major effects that I could do based on a weapon or based on an action or so on and so forth. And it's really cool. Thank you very much.
This is a good lead-in for our next question. Do you guys notice the difference between someone who has prepped their character before a game compared to someone who has not?
I think yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I will say that there's a clear difference between someone who doesn't put much effort, not the mechanic effort, but actual effort into being ready for the game. Because some people, just like with GMs, like there's some GMs who do not read a damn thing or don't have DCs or difficulty levels ready to go, and they still do a great job. There are some players who don't necessarily have a dictionary or have memorized their character sheets to such an intense degree, but they're still great players. And you can kind of tell someone who has like not put much effort into thinking about who their character is, because things end up being quite hollow in that way. And the answer to avoiding that is not always, if it works for you to memorize your character sheet to the nth degree. And also that's a big part of like the conversation you're going to have. Like as a player, you should ask your GM, like, what is expected of me to know about my character? What is expected of me to know about how my abilities function? Because some games are really free flowing and you can get away with that. So the, light prep for players can sometimes work out really well if you have a player who really knows the character that they want to play and the story they want to tell.
Al, you was going to say something?
No, just that. I mean, it's fairly obvious when you're sitting at a table, and it's one person, or they're like Claire said. I feel like I'm just reiterating that their play feels hollow. It's like they're not talking in character. They're just responding. My character does this. Period. Like no, like it's very apparent. And again, there's a difference between someone who's not prepared and someone who might be shy or something like that. Mm-hmm. Shy is you might need to know the person as a person. It really depends. But if you know they're shy, that's not. You kind of play around with that. It's not that they're not prepared. It's you got to kind of know your audience in that regards. And yeah, I mean, again, there's nothing wrong with being very minimal with your role playing, but again, it's obvious when it's a shy person versus a not prepared person. Like again, you'll just see it at the table.
I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here too, in the sense that it also truly depends on the player that you're dealing with, in the sense of where did they come from? Are they a D&D player, or are they a person who plays? So they might approach their character very statistically, looking for the, and it won't come across as fun, for a Cypher player, because we're looking for the narrative aspects, and they're just very plugged in on that level. And don't get to catch the nuances. And that could come across as them maybe not being prepared or not knowing, not really knowing the character. But the other side of the coin is, like Al said, you have people who are shy, and then you do have those people who, hey, I'm just here, So
I think that D20 players have the concept of prepping as a player. I think D&D players are more prepared because they're used to looking at a character sheet and looking at the mechanics and knowing what those abilities do and how to combo off, how to feats. Like, I think that mindset is, character prepping, if I could put it in quotes, is not GM prepping, but character prepping is a very D&D Pathfinder philosophy.
Yeah, because if you don't prep, your character is going to die.
Yeah.
No. What I'm saying is, I think the approach is different, and so how it's presented will come across differently. If it's just statistical to them, because you're right. That's what I was saying. It's statistical. They're looking for the min-max options. So they're going to know, they're going to, come up with the idea, this, like Claire said, 3, 5, 7, 9/11. You know, they're going to use that to their advantage, but they may not have the same conceptualization like Claire said.
Narratively, but
that's what I'm saying. But I'm saying narratively.
All right, you had your turn. Let me finish.
Wait a minute, I was just talking. You cut me off.
All right, go ahead. That's what you were saying.
I was saying what Claire was saying, that how she strung together those two abilities, though, an enabler and an action. I don't necessarily see, you know, a lot of statistical players seeing it through that lens.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the reason is because like with that specific example, like that was to have an interesting scene. I wanted my character to do something that was in who she is and would be an example of what she can do, not necessarily to win something. And I think that's the thing with like the sort of standard D20 stuff is like, yes, they have to prep and they have to crunch, because if you run that game as it's typically expected to be run, they have to prep. Otherwise they're going to die, because they have a singular stat called hit points that only serve to like be knocked down by monsters. So you're always thinking of your abilities in terms of how to preserve those hit points as much as possible, instead of thinking like, what is this going to do narratively that's interesting?
Yeah, I think that was the point I was trying to get at. Is I think the concept of player prep is very D&D. I think the Cypher player has to prep it more on how do I make it fit in the narrative? How do my abilities fit into the narrative, right? And I think that the way you tell a person that hasn't prepped in Cypher is the person that's spamming one ability or spamming one action. It's either one or two things. It's either, hey, I'm disinterested in the game, or I didn't really take the time to connect the dots on how do I make my abilities make sense in the narrative, right? So it's more glaring in Cypher when someone doesn't know how to combo off, because they don't know how to explain away why these abilities combo together in the narrative. But the concept of looking at my character sheet and being aware of what works and what doesn't work is very D&D to me. I think that's what prep is. Like I think that I think Cypher players tend to think that they don't have to prep because it's a narrative system. You understand what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, yeah, the question changes, right? So for a player who's prepping for Cypher, like the question is, who is your character? Whereas for like D&D, I mean, a perfect example, like I run a 5e Tollus campaign, and it's a very involved campaign, and I love it. And we were talking about bringing a new person in, and the way that one of the other players had said, determined our needs for the party was they said, we need a rogue, which is, we need someone who can pass stealth checks and pick locks, as opposed to like, who could be in this game, who could tell this story along with us. And that's more of a Cypher System thing, because that is kind of baked very directly in with the rules, and the assumption is it's going to carry out that way, as opposed to like D&D, where it really is about what is your character. And that's how you get the kind of, the speak that tends to happen with D&D, where people are like, oh, this is a squishy character, or this is a high DPS character, or something like that.
The tank, yeah.
This is the tank, this is the healer, this is the squishy character who has to stay back. Like you're constantly speaking in those terms, in terms of like what specific role you are trying to fill in order to succeed at a combat simulation, which can be fun. I run a 5e game for a reason. But
right, I mean, it's very fun, and like I said, I think that's like the difference. So you can tell, you have to, like I said, I think Al said it the best, know your audience.
Yes.
Know who's coming to your table. If I got a bunch of 5e players coming to the table, I know I'm going to run a definitely different type of Cypher game for them than I would run for a bunch of people I know coming from Powered by the Apocalypse or coming from Fate,
mm-hmm.
And I would expect a different, outlook when they come to that table. So that's all. But that's
And I will interject real quick to say that is the beautiful thing about Cypher System, is that you can cater to all these different audiences so easily with just a little bit of work.
And recognizing what your table wants.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, let's ask. We are an hour and a half in, so let's last. Who wants to? Dean, you want to ask our last question?
If you have any advice for first-time players in the Cypher system, what would that advice be, you know, about pre-game prep?
I'll go first is know what your abilities do and know what your ciphers do. You don't have to memorize it, but have a general understanding. So if the GM asks you, what's that do again? You could give them a basic general knowledge of what the ability does. That's all I really ask from a player. Everything else is gravy. Just knowing your abilities is good enough for me. You know, so like if you could do that, that's the minimum for me. And if you could do the minimum, I'm happy.
Al?
For me, yeah, for a new player, I would say, quote unquote, was what Claire was saying about being like a what is it? Not having much time to prepare as a GM. Get into it. Be excited to be who you are in this game. Like it does. Like again, you might have a little bit of a a trip over like knowing your abilities verbatim or knowing your skills exactly, but if you can get into your character and like enjoy the role play, enjoy your your place in the story, I think that is more important than knowing exactly what your skills do, because again, it just takes a few seconds to, like, let's say, hey, I don't know what fleet of foot does. It takes a few seconds for another player to say, hey, it does this. Whereas if you're not in the mood or not, role playing well, you're not like feeling it, that can really bring down the whole table. And there's not really much you can do in the game once you're already in it to alleviate that. You're already bringing down the mood, bringing down the funk, whatever have you. So before getting into the game, be sure like you actually want to do it. Like be present for it.
All right.
Well,
Claire?
Yeah, because role-playing games are interactive storytelling, to me, it makes sense for new players to focus on the kind of the most concrete mechanic in the Cypher system, which is understand how that 10 levels of difficulty works. Understand what it means when you hear a level 4 difficulty. It's always 3 times the difficulty number, and understand how that can be reduced, right? Training reduces it by 1, specialization by 2. You can have as many as 2 assets, and you can use effort. So like understanding how that difficulty system works and how you can manipulate it with your abilities and skills is like absolutely a foundational skill to understand as a Cypher system player. Because if you get that, that clears up a lot of the, what do I have to roll? What do I add to this? Those kinds of questions. If you understand how tasks are resolved in the Cypher system, that means that you can put that away and pull that out when you need it, and you can just focus on the storytelling.
And I'm going to say the advice that these guys gave you is absolutely imperative. It is great. But in the same breath, I'm going to say, don't worry about the rules. The rules really don't matter, because if you're having fun and you got a good GM, your GM is worth their salt, they're having fun, you know what? All the rule stuff it'll come as time goes on.
Yeah.
It'll all come as time goes on. Knowing the character sheet, knowing the abilities on the character sheet, that is a absolute help and dream for the GM. Understanding that foundational rule, as Claire said, the factor of 3, it is foundational. But the reality is, come in with this attitude that, you know what, I am coming in and today I am the Red Ranger and I'm about to kick some ass. That's what you gotta be there, be in the moment, or whatever character, floats your boat. If you want to be She-Ra, you're She-Ra today. You know what? I mean, we played a game once and I got to be the gingerbread man. And for all intents and purposes, I was a gingerbread man the whole time I got to play him. And it was great. And that's where I was at. I was the gingerbread man for 35 minutes. And it was awesome. So that's what I'm going to tell you guys. Just embrace it.
Yeah, I forget if it was you or Anthony or probably both of you or maybe one of our other guests who have said it in the past, but the rules are for the GM, not the player.
Yeah.
The GM will tell you what you need to roll. The GM will tell you, you know, what needs to happen as far as the mechanics or whatever have you go. If you can let go of having to know the nuances of all the rules, it lets you focus on the role play, on the, you know, the actual game at hand, instead of getting caught up. Oh, can I actually attempt this? If I attempt this, what's the mathematical chance? Just try it. Be in the character. Do your thing. The GM will let you know about the rules that you need to worry about when they come.
You know, it's funny. It's actually the other way around, though, Al. I always say the rules are for the players, because in Cypher System, you're free. We know the rules, but the rules just basically keep the players in line, so we as GMs can be free. And that's how it works for me for Cypher System. You know, the players don't necessarily need to know all the rules. The players need to know where they fit within the parameters. I got everything else, you know. So, Anthony, you got something to say to these wonderful people who've hung out with us?
First, real quick thing, the very first video me and Al made 2 years ago was Fudge the Rules and Just Have Fun. I don't know if you remember
absolutely.
that.
I just a little bit remember it.
That was like the very first video we ever did. But if you like us and you like what we do, please join the Cypher Unlimited Discord. We have the largest fan-run Discord server for all things Monte Cooke games. We have almost 4,000 members there, so please go chat about all things Monte Cooke games. Get in the game. If Discord is not your thing, join our Facebook group. It's not as big as our Discord, but there's people chatting about all things Monte Cooke games there as well. Or give us a like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. We really appreciate it. Try to bring our counts up, you know, our viewer count up there. So if you could subscribe there and, you know, give us a like and share it around, we really appreciate that as well. Or give us a follow or subscription here on Twitch. Same thing. Our videos will always be free, but it helps us, you know, help us grow the channel. Give us a donation on Ko-fi. Helps us with little things like Zoom calls. Once again, we really appreciate that. Or go to our Cypher Unlimited store and pick up some cool CU merch. You know, pick up some hats. What else we got? Mugs, capes, all sorts of cool crap. Go over there and pick that stuff up. And I'm running out of breath. I think that's everything, right? Did I miss anything?
No,
if I could.
Oh yeah, and Claire, yeah, of course, yeah.
Before we all go away, this week on the Infinite Construct, we'll have a community Q&A video. I've had a bunch of people submit some questions. Some were submitted for tonight. If we got to them, but I'll kind of go over some of those again, put those in a Q&A video for the end of the week. November, I'm going to be doing some Twitch streams on the Infinite Construct Twitch channel. Going to be bringing back some of the music creation streams, but more specifically to Numenera. I'm going to be doing another Ruin Generation stream. Not sure exactly when that'll happen, but that'll be sometime in November. And I'm going to do a few character creation streams. We're going to kind of go through the book and build some nanos and some glaives and some jacks and delves and archai and right. And we're going to kind of like really dig in for that. And in 2022, the Numenera inspiration videos are going to come back. There is a poll right now in the community section of the Infinite Construct YouTube channel, and it looks like Final Fantasy X is winning out. So sometime in early 2022, you can expect a Numenera inspirations video on how you can sort of draw stuff from Final Fantasy X and bring that to your Numenera games, and kind of bring that level of storytelling and sort of fantastical science fantasy stuff to life. So yeah, go subscribe to the Infinite Construct on YouTube and Twitch and Twitter and all that stuff to be the first to know about that.
Please do, because if you want to know anything about Numenera, Claire is the definitive expert on the subject.
Thank you.
Whenever anyone asks anything about Numenera, I just refer them to Claire for the construct. I'm like, hey, just watch this YouTube video. Claire did a video about it. It explains it all. You know.
Exactly.
Most definitely. And those links are in the chat right now. And for those of you watching on YouTube, they will be down below. So definitely check them out. Drop them follows and whatnot. But yeah, this has been a blast. Thank you everybody for stopping by. Awesome conversation. Thank you, Claire, again, as always, for stopping by. Of course,
thank you for having me.
Us. Anthony, Dean, any final words before I sign us off?
Just love you, Claire, and you have an open invitation to come back whenever you want.
We'll do this again soon.
Yeah,
sounds good.
And yeah, So thank you again so much, everyone. And from us at the CU, we will see you later.